The stagecoach rattled to a stop in front of Willow Creek's only hotel, stirring up a cloud of dust that momentarily obscured the small gathering of onlookers. Martha Finley clutched her worn leather satchel to her chest, heart pounding against her ribs as she peered through the dirt-streaked window. This moment, this town represented her last hope for a new beginning in the unforgiving frontier of 1875 Colorado. "End of the line, miss," the driver called, opening the door with a creak that matched the ache in Martha's bones after 3 days of travel. She stepped down carefully, mindful of the mud that might splatter her only good dress, a simple brown cotton garment with modest lace at the collar. It wasn't fashionable, but it was clean and proper, just like Martha herself. At 22, she wasn't a beauty by any standard. Her mouse-brown hair was pulled back in a practical bun, her face unmemorable save for a pair of thoughtful hazel eyes that betrayed an intelligence she'd learned to downplay. A short, balding man with spectacles pushed through the small crowd. "Miss Finley, I'm Edwin Porter, the town clerk." Martha nodded, forcing a smile. "Yes, sir, I've come as arranged, indeed." His eyes scanned her from head to toe, not unkindly but with unmistakable assessment. "Mr. Thornton is waiting at his mercantile, if you'll follow me." The town of Willow Creek appeared much like the dozens of other frontier settlements Martha had passed through on her journey west from Boston. A single dusty main street lined with wooden buildings, their false fronts reaching optimistically toward the sky. Women with weary eyes peered from windows and doorways, curious about the newcomer, while men paused in their work to study her with varying degrees of interest. Martha had responded to an advertisement in the Boston Herald. "Established businessman seeks respectable, practical wife for companionship and assistance in running mercantile business. Passage paid." After exchanging several carefully composed letters with George Thornton, she'd sold her few possessions to supplement the train fare he'd sent and embarked on this terrifying adventure. She had no illusions about herself or the arrangement. This was not a love match. It was a practical solution for a plain, bookish woman with no family and few prospects in Boston, and for a frontier businessman who needed a helpmate. Martha had resigned herself to such practical considerations long ago. The mercantile occupied a prominent corner building, its windows displaying an eclectic array of goods. Martha smoothed her dress and patted her hair as they approached, determined to make a favorable impression. Inside, a broad-shouldered man with a neatly trimmed beard stood behind the counter, tallying figures in a ledger. He looked up as they entered, his expression hardening almost imperceptibly. "Mr. Thornton, may I present Miss Martha Finley?" Edwin announced. George Thornton stepped forward, extending a hand that Martha shook with careful propriety. "Miss Finley, welcome to Willow Creek." "Thank you, sir. I'm pleased to finally meet you in person." His expression remained fixed in polite neutrality, but Martha recognized the look in his eyes' disappointment. She'd seen it before, that moment when men realized her letters revealed a sharper mind than her unremarkable appearance suggested. "I trust your journey was comfortable?" Thornton asked, the words coming out stiff and formal. "As comfortable as could be expected, thank you." An awkward silence fell, filled only by Edwin Porter clearing his throat. "Well, I'll leave you two to get acquainted. Miss Finley, should you need anything, my office is just down the street." After Porter left, Thornton gestured to a chair near the counter. "Please sit. You must be tired." "Thank you." Martha perched on the edge of the chair, back straight, hands folded in her lap as she'd been taught. Thornton busied himself with arranging items on a shelf, avoiding her eyes. "I've arranged a room for you at the hotel. Mrs. Sullivan is expecting you." Martha's heart sank. In his letters, he'd mentioned preparing a room in his house above the store. This change of plan spoke volumes. "I see, that's very thoughtful." "I thought it best," he said stiffly. "Until we—" "Well, until we determine if this arrangement will be suitable. Of course." Martha fought to keep her voice steady. "Perfectly sensible." Over the next hour, their conversation remained painfully formal. Thornton showed her around the mercantile, explaining his inventory system and accounting methods. Martha asked intelligent questions and offered suggestions based on her experience working in her uncle's bookshop. But with each passing minute, Thornton's responses grew more distant. Finally, as the afternoon light began to fade, he escorted her to the hotel, carrying her trunk while she clutched her satchel. "Miss Finley," he said at the hotel entrance, setting down her trunk, "I must be honest with you." Martha braced herself. "I would expect nothing less, Mr. Thornton. You seem a very capable woman, and your letters suggested as much, but I—" He tugged at his collar. "I believe I may have misrepresented my situation. The mercantile is doing well, but not well enough to support a wife just yet." "Perhaps in a year or two, Mr. Thornton," Martha interrupted gently. "You're trying to let me down kindly, and I appreciate that. But we both know the issue isn't the mercantile's profits." His face reddened. "Miss Finley, it's all right." She managed a small smile. "I'm not what you expected. It happens more often than you might think." Thornton had the grace to look ashamed. "You seem a fine woman, truly, just not—" "Not what you had in mind," she finished for him. "I understand. What will happen now?" He shifted uncomfortably. "I've paid for your room for a week. The stage returns east on Thursday or continues west on Monday. I'll honor my commitment to your return passage, of course." "That's very decent of you." Martha's voice remained steady even as her future collapsed around her. A week in a strange town, then what? Return to Boston with no job, no home, and the added shame of being rejected. Or continue west to an even more uncertain fate. "Good evening, Miss Finley." Thornton tipped his hat and turned away, relief evident in the set of his shoulders as he strode back toward his store. Martha stood frozen for a moment before a voice startled her. "He's a fool, that one." She turned to find a woman in her 50s watching from the hotel doorway, arms crossed over her ample bosom. "Mrs. Sullivan, I presume?" "That's right." "And you'd be the mail-order bride that wasn't fancy enough for George Thornton." Her blunt words were softened by a kind expression. "Come in, dear. Supper's almost ready, and you look like you could use a hot meal and a sympathetic ear." Martha followed her inside, fighting back tears. The hotel was small but clean, with a dining room off the lobby and a narrow staircase leading to the rooms above. "It's not much," Mrs. Sullivan said, "but it's respectable. Room 3 at the top of the stairs. Wash up and come down for supper." In the small room with its narrow bed and plain furnishings, Martha finally allowed herself a moment of despair. She sank onto the bed and buried her face in her hands, shoulders shaking with silent sobs. Everything she owned was in the trunk at her feet. Her entire future had hinged on this arrangement, and now she was stranded in a town where everyone would soon know she'd been deemed unsuitable. When her tears subsided, Martha washed her face in the basin provided, changed into her second-best dress, and made her way downstairs. The dining room held several tables, most occupied by men who looked up at her entrance. Mrs. Sullivan waved her over to a table near the kitchen. "Sit yourself down, dear. I'll bring you a plate." The food was simple but hearty: roast beef, potatoes, and greens. Martha realized she was ravenous despite her distress and thanked Mrs. Sullivan sincerely. "It's nothing fancy," the older woman said, sitting down across from her. "Frontier cooking isn't about frills." "It's wonderful," Martha assured her, "and I appreciate your kindness." Mrs. Sullivan waved off her gratitude. I've seen too many young women arrive with stars in their eyes only to have them dimmed by the harsh realities of frontier life, or by men like George Thornton. He seems a decent man, Martha felt compelled to say. Just disappointed. Humph. What he wanted was a pretty ornament, not a partner. Man's been widowed 3 years and suddenly decided he needed a wife when the Wilkinsons' daughter chose the blacksmith over him. Mrs. Sullivan's voice lowered. Truth is, he's more concerned with appearances than substance. Always has been. Martha absorbed this information silently, wondering how different her reception might have been had she possessed golden curls or rosy cheeks. So what will you do now? Mrs. Sullivan asked. Martha sighed. I don't know. I can't afford to stay here indefinitely, and I have nothing to return to in Boston. You have any skills besides being sensible, which, mind you, is rarer than it should be. I worked in my uncle's bookshop for years. I can keep accounts, order inventory, handle correspondence. I can sew adequately, though not professionally. Martha smiled ruefully. I'm educated enough to teach basics, though I have no formal training as a teacher. Mrs. Sullivan nodded thoughtfully. Willow Creek could use a school teacher. The last one left to get married 6 months ago. Town council's been dragging their feet about finding a replacement. Hope flickered briefly in Martha's chest before reality doused it. I doubt they'd hire me without credentials, especially knowing I came here as a bride for Mr. Thornton. Perhaps not, Mrs. Sullivan conceded. But there might be other opportunities. Frontier towns always need capable people. Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of several cowboys, trailed dusty and loud as they entered the dining room. Mrs. Sullivan excused herself to serve them, leaving Martha to finish her meal in solitude. As she ate, Martha couldn't help overhearing snippets of conversation from the cowboys' table. They worked at the Triple R, it seemed, a ranch owned by someone named Rutherford. They discussed cattle, horses, and the upcoming spring roundup with the easy camaraderie of men who'd worked together for some time. One man sat slightly apart from the others, taller, with broader shoulders and a quieter demeanor. Unlike his companions, who occasionally shot curious glances her way, this man kept his attention on his food and the conversation at hand. Something about his reserved manner intrigued Martha, though she was careful not to be caught staring. The next morning, Martha rose early, determined to make the most of her week in Willow Creek. After breakfast, she approached Mrs. Sullivan. Is there somewhere in town I might find temporary work? I'd like to earn my keep while I decide what to do next. Mrs. Sullivan considered this. You might try the newspaper office. Old man Jenkins runs it himself since his son left for Denver. His hands trouble him something fierce, so he might appreciate help with typesetting. The Willow Creek Gazette occupied a narrow building between the barber shop and the land office. Inside, Martha found an elderly man hunched over a printing press, muttering to himself as he struggled to place tiny metal letters into a frame. Excuse me, Martha called. Mr. Jenkins. He straightened with evident difficulty, revealing a face lined with age and intelligence. That's me. What can I do for you, miss? I'm Martha Finley. Mrs. Sullivan suggested I might be able to offer my assistance. Recognition dawned in his rheumy eyes. Ah, Thornton's mail-order bride. Martha winced. News traveled fast in small towns. I was, yes. To her surprise, Jenkins merely nodded. Man's a fool. Always has been when it comes to women. What sort of assistance were you offering? Encouraged by his matter-of-fact manner, Martha explained her experience with typesetting from her uncle's bookshop. Jenkins listened intently, then gestured to the press. Show me what you can do. For the next hour, Martha demonstrated her skills, carefully arranging type for the next edition. Jenkins watched with growing approval. "You've got a steady hand and a good eye," he finally declared. "I can't pay much, but I could use help 3 days a week." The arthritis makes this work pure torture some days. Relief washed over Martha. "Thank you, Mr. Jenkins. I'd be grateful for the opportunity." "Don't thank me. I'm getting the better end of this deal." He handed her a stack of handwritten pages. "Here's what needs setting for Thursday's edition. Mind you read it carefully. I won't have my paper going out with mistakes." Martha spent the day at the Gazette, losing herself in the familiar, meticulous work of typesetting. By late afternoon, she'd completed most of the front page, earning grudging praise from Jenkins. "Not bad," he admitted. "Come back tomorrow and we'll finish up." As Martha walked back to the hotel, she felt marginally better about her situation. Temporary work meant temporary income, which meant more time to consider her options. Perhaps she could save enough for passage further west, to California or Oregon, where opportunities might be more plentiful. Her path took her past the Mercantile, where she glimpsed George Thornton through the window, assisting a well-dressed woman with her purchases. The woman laughed at something he said, touching his arm with practiced flirtation. Martha quickened her pace, unwilling to be seen by either of them. At the hotel, she found Mrs. Sullivan in conversation with the tall, quiet cowboy from the previous evening. Up close, Martha could see he was younger than she'd initially thought, perhaps 30, with sun-weathered skin and eyes the deep blue of a mountain lake. "Ah, Martha," Mrs. Sullivan called. "Come meet Mr. Rutherford's foreman. This is Vincent Reed." The cowboy touched the brim of his hat. "Madam, Mr. Reed," Martha acknowledged with a polite nod. "Vince was just telling me they're looking for someone to cook at the R Ranch House," Mrs. Sullivan explained. "Their previous cook left rather suddenly." "Ran off with a traveling salesman," Vince clarified, his deep voice carrying a hint of wry amusement. "Left 15 hungry cowboys with nothing but beans and bacon between them and starvation." "I've already told him you're not looking for that sort of position," Mrs. Sullivan assured Martha. "What with your arrangement at the Gazette?" "That's very kind of you to think of me," Martha said to Vince, "but Mrs. Sullivan is right. I've found employment here in town." Vince nodded, his expression neutral. "Can't blame a man for trying. Mrs. Sullivan's cooking had me hoping she might know someone with similar talents." "I'm afraid my cooking skills are serviceable at best," Martha admitted. "Nothing like Mrs. Sullivan's. Pity." He touched his hat again. "Best of luck with your position at the Gazette, Miss Finley." After he left, Mrs. Sullivan chuckled. "That's the most I've heard Vince Reed say at one time in all the years he's been coming to town. Usually just grunts and nods." "He seems reserved," Martha observed. "He's a good man. Works hard, keeps to himself mostly. Been foreman at the R for 5 years now." Mrs. Sullivan's eyes twinkled. "And not hard to look at if you don't mind a man who's more comfortable with horses than people." Martha felt her cheeks warm. "I wasn't, that is, I didn't notice." "Of course not, dear." Mrs. Sullivan's knowing smile suggested otherwise. "Supper's at 6. Over the next few days, Martha settled into a routine. Mornings and afternoons at the Gazette, evenings helping Mrs. Sullivan serve supper in exchange for reduced room rates. The work kept her hands busy and her mind from dwelling too much on her precarious situation. Word of her rejection had spread through town, of course. She endured curious stares and whispered conversations that stopped when she approached. George Thornton avoided the newspaper office and crossed the street when he saw her coming, which suited Martha fine. On her third evening at the hotel, the R Cowboys returned for supper. This time, Vince Reed sat at a table alone, and when Martha brought his meal, he surprised her by asking her to join him. "I don't want to intrude," she demurred. "Not an intrusion if I'm asking," he pointed out. When she hesitated, he added, "Mrs. Sullivan says you're from Boston. Never met anyone from there before." Curiosity overcame propriety, and Martha sat down across from him. "Have you lived in Colorado long, Mr. Reed? Call me Vince." "And yes, born and raised about 50 miles south of here." He cut into his steak. "What brought you out west, if you don't mind my asking? Besides the obvious." Martha tensed. "The obvious." The advertisement. Thornton's been crowing about his mail-order bride for weeks. He met her eyes directly. "Town's talking about how he changed his mind when he saw you. Makes me wonder what kind of man advertises for a wife, then rejects her because she doesn't match some picture in his head." Martha stared at him, caught between embarrassment and a strange sense of vindication at his blunt assessment. "You're very direct, Mr. Reed." "Vince," he corrected again. "And yes, life's too short for dancing around truths." "Well then, yes, I came in response to Mr. Thornton's advertisement. I had no family left in Boston and limited prospects. It seemed a practical solution." She lifted her chin slightly. "I harbor no illusions about my appearance, Mr. Reed. I'm plain, and I've made my peace with that, but I'm also intelligent, hardworking, and capable. Mr. Thornton's priorities simply lay elsewhere." Vince studied her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. "Seems to me, a woman with sense and capability is worth 10 with just a pretty face." The simple statement, delivered without flattery or pity, warmed something in Martha's chest. "That's a minority opinion, I'm afraid. I've rarely found myself in the majority on most matters." A hint of a smile crossed his face. "Jenkins says you're good with the typesetting." "You spoke to Mr. Jenkins about me," Vince shrugged. "Small town, people talk." Martha wasn't sure how to respond to that, so she changed the subject. "Have you found a cook for the ranch?" "Not yet. Mr. Rutherford's coming to town tomorrow to interview a prospect, but I don't have high hopes. Man used to cook for a lumber camp, which means he can make beans and biscuits and not much else." Their conversation continued through the meal, touching on the ranch, the newspaper, and life in Willow Creek. Vince, though not talkative by nature, answered her questions thoughtfully and asked his own with genuine interest. By the time they finished eating, Martha realized she'd enjoyed herself more than she had in years. "Thank you for the company," she said as she rose to help Mrs. Sullivan clear tables. "My pleasure, Miss Finley." "Martha," she offered, "if I'm to call you Vince." He nodded, that hint of a smile returning. "Martha, then." The next day at the Gazette, Martha was alone setting type when the door opened, admitting George Thornton and a striking blonde woman on his arm. Martha's stomach tightened as she recognized the woman from the Mercantile. "Miss Finley," Thornton said stiffly. "Is Jenkins about?" "He's gone to the post office," Martha replied, keeping her voice even. "He should return shortly." "This is Miss Caroline Watson," Thornton said, as if Martha had asked. "She's recently arrived from St. Louis to stay with her uncle, Judge Watson." "How do you do?" Martha nodded politely. Caroline Watson surveyed Martha with barely concealed disdain. "So you're the mail-order bride. George told me all about the misunderstanding." "Did he?" Martha kept her expression neutral. "There was no misunderstanding, Miss Watson. Mr. Thornton advertised for a wife," I responded, "and upon meeting me he determined I wasn't suitable. Perfectly straightforward." Thornton's face reddened. "Now see here, we're placing an announcement in the paper," Caroline interrupted, her voice syrupy sweet. "George has asked me to marry him, and I've accepted." Martha absorbed this news with as much dignity as she could muster. Less than a week after rejecting her, Thornton had found a replacement, one who matched whatever image he'd had in mind when he'd sent for Martha. "Congratulations," she managed. "I'll inform Mr. Jenkins of your announcement when he returns." "We'll wait," Caroline declared. making herself comfortable in Jenkins' chair while Thornton hovered awkwardly. Martha returned to her typesetting, acutely aware of the couple's whispered conversation and occasional glances in her direction. Relief flooded her when Jenkins finally returned, his eyebrows rising at the sight of Thornton and Caroline. "Jenkins, we'd like to place an announcement," Thornton began importantly. "Engagement, is it?" Jenkins didn't wait for confirmation. $2 for 3 column inches. "Miss Finley can take the details." "Actually," Caroline said with a brittle smile, "we'd prefer to work with you directly." Jenkins snorted. "Miss Finley handles all the typesetting now. Either give her your announcement or come back next week when my hands might be working better." After a moment of uncomfortable silence, Thornton dictated the announcement to Martha, who recorded it with professional detachment. When they left, Jenkins shook his head. "Didn't take him long, did it? Judge Watson's been trying to marry off that niece of his for 2 years. Girl's got looks but a tongue like a viper." "It's none of my concern," Martha said quietly. Jenkins gave her a shrewd look. "No, I suppose it isn't, but I'd say you had a narrow escape, Miss Finley." That evening, the R Cowboys returned to the hotel, accompanied by an older man Martha presumed was Mr. Rutherford. She noticed Vince watching her as she helped serve, but he didn't approach her until after the meal, catching her as she stepped outside for a breath of air. "Heard about Thornton's engagement," he said without preamble. Martha sighed. "News travels fast. Like I said, small town." He leaned against the porch railing beside her. "You all right?" The question surprised her. "Why wouldn't I be? It's not as if I had formed an attachment to Mr. Thornton." "Still, can't be pleasant." Martha considered this. "It's humiliating more than anything. Everyone knows I was rejected, and now they'll see him marrying someone else almost immediately. It rather confirms that the deficiency was in me, not in his circumstances as he claimed." "Anyone with eyes can see the deficiency is in him," Vince said with unexpected vehemence. "Man wouldn't know a treasure if it was dropped in his lap." The comment startled a laugh from Martha. "Well, I wouldn't go that far, but I appreciate the sentiment." They stood in companionable silence for a moment, watching the sunset paint the mountains in shades of purple and gold. "Mr. Rutherford hired the cook," Vince finally said. "Man named Hanson. Claims he can make more than beans and biscuits, but I have my doubts. I hope he works out for you. If he doesn't, we'll manage." Vince turned to face her. "How long do you plan to stay in Willow Creek?" Martha shrugged. "I'm not sure. The work at the Gazette is temporary, and Mrs. Sullivan can't keep discounting my room indefinitely. I'll need to make a decision soon." "What are your options?" "Return east, I suppose, though there's nothing for me there. Or continue west and try my luck in a larger town." Vince nodded slowly. "Or you could stay here." "And do what?" "Jenkins doesn't need permanent help, and I doubt the town council would hire me as the schoolteacher without proper credentials." "You could marry me." The words hung in the air between them, so unexpected that Martha was certain she'd misheard. "I beg your pardon," Vince cleared his throat, looking as surprised by his proposal as she felt. "I said you could marry me, if you wanted to stay in Willow Creek." Martha stared at him, waiting for the jest, but his expression remained earnest. "Mr. Reed, Vince, we barely know each other. I know you're intelligent and capable. I know you're brave enough to travel across the country to make a new life. I know you handled Thornton's rejection with more dignity than most would." He ran a hand through his hair. "And I know I've enjoyed talking with you more than I've enjoyed talking with anyone in a long time. But why? I've been foreman at the R for 5 years. Mr. Rutherford's talking about retiring, maybe selling me the ranch on terms." Vince's eyes held hers steadily. "I've put off thinking about a wife because most women I meet either can't handle ranch life or are looking for something I can't give them: fancy clothes, social standing, that sort of thing. And you think I can handle ranch life? Based on what? Based on the fact that you came west knowing it wouldn't be easy. Based on how you've handled adversity since arriving. He smiled slightly. And based on a hunch. Martha's mind raced. Was this another practical arrangement like the one she'd made with Thornton? Or was there something more to it? This is very sudden, I know, and I'm not asking for an answer right now. Vince straightened. Think about it. Talk to Mrs. Sullivan if you want a woman's perspective on what ranch life is like. I'll be in town until Saturday. And if I say no, then no hard feelings. I'll wish you well wherever you decide to go next. With that, he tipped his hat and returned inside, leaving Martha bewildered and strangely breathless. The next morning, she sought out Mrs. Sullivan in the kitchen. "Vince Reed asked me to marry him," she blurted without preamble. Mrs. Sullivan paused in kneading bread dough, eyes widening. "Did he now? Well, well, you don't seem surprised. I've seen how he looks at you." Mrs. Sullivan resumed kneading. "And I've never known Vince Reed to act impulsively. If he asked, he means it." "But we hardly know each other," Martha protested. "Sometimes that's how it happens out here. Life's harder on the frontier. People make decisions quicker." Mrs. Sullivan dusted flour from her hands. "Do you like him?" Yes, I suppose I do. He's straightforward, intelligent, easy to talk to." "Not to mention easy on the eyes," Mrs. Sullivan added with a wink. Martha felt her cheeks warm. "That's hardly a basis for marriage." "No, but it doesn't hurt." The older woman's expression grew serious. "Ranch life isn't easy, especially for women. It's isolated, the work never ends, and comforts are few. But there's a freedom to it too, a sense of building something that matters. You sound like you speak from experience." "I was a rancher's wife for 27 years before Henry died. Hardest and best years of my life." Mrs. Sullivan patted Martha's hand. "The question isn't whether you can handle it, dear. It's whether you want to." Martha spent the rest of the day in turmoil, her thoughts circling between practical considerations and deeper questions about what she truly wanted from life. By evening, she'd reached no conclusion. The Triple R men came for supper as usual, but Vince wasn't among them. Disappointed and oddly relieved, Martha focused on her duties, only to look up as the door opened an hour later to admit Vince, freshly shaven, hair neatly combed, wearing a clean shirt and what appeared to be his best jeans. He nodded to her across the room but took a seat alone, and Martha understood he was giving her space to think. The consideration touched her. After the dining room emptied, Martha approached his table with coffee. "May I join you?" He gestured to the chair across from him. "Please." Martha sat, gathering her courage. "I've been thinking about your proposal, and I'm not sure what to make of it, honestly. We met less than a week ago. This seems impulsive." Vince considered this. "Maybe it is. But I know my own mind, Martha. I've watched you this week, how you handle yourself, how you treat others, how you've faced a difficult situation with grace. Those things tell me more about a person than months of formal courtship. What exactly are you offering, Vince?" "A practical arrangement like the one I had with Mr. Thornton. Or something else?" He met her gaze directly. "I'm offering a partnership. I need someone with sense and capability to help build something worthwhile at the Triple R. You need a place to belong. But I'm also offering the chance for something more, if that's what we both come to want. And if it isn't, then we'll have a solid marriage based on mutual respect and shared purpose. There are worse foundations." Martha couldn't argue with that. "May I ask you something personal?" He nodded. "Have you been married before?" "No." He turned his coffee cup slowly. "Came close once about 8 years back. She chose a banker instead. Safer life, I suppose. I'm sorry. Don't be. She made the right choice for her." He smiled faintly. Took me a while to see that. Martha studied him, this quiet man who'd offered her an unexpected lifeline. There was a steadiness to him, a certainty in his own skin that she found appealing. And despite her protestations about his appearance not mattering, she couldn't deny that the sight of him stirred something within her that George Thornton never had. "I still have questions," she said. "About the ranch, about what you'd expect from a wife, about—" "Ask them," he interrupted gently. "I'll answer anything you want to know." For the next hour they talked more openly than they had before. Vince described the Triple R 5,000 acres, 300 head of cattle, a growing horse breeding operation. He explained his agreement with Rutherford, the improvements he'd made to the ranch house, his plans for the future. Martha shared more about her life in Boston, her love of books, her experience helping her uncle with his business. By the time Mrs. Sullivan discreetly reminded them of the late hour, Martha felt she knew Vince better and liked what she knew. "I still need time to think," she told him as they stood to leave. "Take all the time you need." He hesitated, then added, "But know this, I wouldn't have asked if I wasn't certain. Whatever you decide, I won't regret asking." The following day was Saturday, the day Vince had said he'd be leaving town. Martha went to the Gazette as usual but found herself unable to focus on the typesetting. Jenkins noticed her distraction but said nothing until midday. "Go on," he finally said, waving her toward the door. "Sort out whatever's got you mixing up your P-to-Kes and Q-to-Kes. Come back Monday with a clear head." Martha wandered through town, barely noticing the curious glances from townspeople. Her path took her past the church, where she paused, watching as Caroline Watson emerged with the pastor, clearly discussing wedding arrangements. George Thornton waited nearby, beaming with pride. The sight should have stung, but Martha felt only a vague relief that she'd escaped a marriage to a man who valued appearance over substance. Would marriage to Vince Reed be different? He claimed to value her intelligence and capability, but what if that changed? What if, like so many men, he expected a demure, obedient wife once the vows were spoken? Her feet carried her to the edge of town, where the land opened up to rolling hills and distant mountains. The vastness of the landscape both terrified and exhilarated her. This was the frontier unformed, full of possibility and danger in equal measure. Was she brave enough to claim a place in it? A sound made her turn. Vince sat on horseback a few yards away, watching her. "I didn't mean to disturb you," he said. "Was heading back to the ranch and saw you standing here." "I was thinking," Martha admitted. He dismounted and led his horse closer. "About my proposal, yes." And Martha took a deep breath. "I have conditions." A smile tugged at his lips. "I'm listening." "If I agree to marry you, I want a real marriage, not just a business arrangement. I want the chance for affection to grow between us." "That's what I want too," he said quietly. "I want to bring books to the ranch, as many as I can afford. Reading isn't a frivolous pastime for me, it's essential. I've got empty shelves that need filling. I want to be treated as a partner in decisions that affect our life together, not just as a housekeeper or she faltered, cheeks warming. "Not just as a convenience," he finished for her. "I understand. Anything else?" Martha hesitated, then squared her shoulders. "I want to know why me, the truth." Vince was silent for a long moment, his eyes never leaving hers. "Because when I first saw you in the dining room, you looked complete. Like you knew exactly who you were and weren't apologizing for it. And when I heard how Thornton had treated you, I was angry on your behalf, not because I pitied you, but because I admired your dignity." He stepped closer. "The more I talked with you, the more I wanted to keep talking. You're intelligent without being showy about it, kind without being soft, strong without being hard, And yes, you're pleasing to look at, though you don't seem to know it." Martha blinked in surprise. "There's no need to flatter me, Vince. I know I'm plain." "You're not plain," he contradicted. "You're just not showy. There's a difference. Your eyes change color depending on the light. Your smile transforms your whole face, and you move with a grace that catches a man's attention." No one had ever described her in such terms before. Martha felt a warmth spreading through her that had nothing to do with the afternoon sun. "So those are my conditions," she said, her voice steadier than she felt. "What are yours? Just one?" His expression grew serious. "That you're certain?" "I don't want you agreeing because you feel you have no other options. I want you to choose me because you want to." The simple honesty of his request touched her deeply. Martha studied him, this tall, steady man who saw value in her that others had missed. Something inside her shifted, a recognition of possibility that hadn't existed a week ago. "I choose this," she said quietly. "I choose you." The smile that spread across his face transformed his features from handsome to breathtaking. "Then I guess we're getting married." Things moved quickly after that. Vince took Martha to meet Randall Rutherford, who proved to be a jovial man in his 60s with shrewd eyes and a booming laugh. "About time you found yourself a wife, Vince," he declared after Martha explained their arrangement. "And a sensible one at that. Got a head for business, this one. You can see it in her eyes." They agreed to marry the following Saturday, giving Martha time to settle her affairs in town. Mrs. Sullivan insisted on hosting a small reception at the hotel after the ceremony. "Nothing fancy," she assured Martha. "Just a proper acknowledgement of the occasion." Word of their engagement spread through Willow Creek like wildfire. Martha endured a fresh round of curious stares and whispered conversations, but this time with her head held high. On Wednesday, she was arranging type at the Gazette when Caroline Watson swept in. "Is it true?" she demanded without preamble. "You're marrying Vincent Reed?" Martha set down her composing stick. "Yes, I am." Caroline's perfect features arranged themselves into a sympathetic expression that didn't reach her eyes. "How? Fortunate for you. After what happened with George, I mean. Vincent Reed is quite a catch for certain types of women." "What type would that be, Miss Watson?" "Oh, you know. Women who don't mind isolation, who aren't concerned with society or refinement." Caroline fingered the lace at her wrist. "Of course, the Triple R is one of the largest ranches in the territory. That must be some consolation." Martha recognized the implication that she was marrying Vince for his prospects rather than for himself. The suggestion stung more than she expected. "Mr. Reed and I suit each other very well," she said evenly. "I wish you and Mr. Thornton the same happiness." Caroline's smile tightened. "How civil you are. I suppose that's the mark of good breeding, even if one's circumstances have diminished." Before Martha could respond, the door opened to admit Vince himself. He took in the scene with a glance. "Miss Watson," he nodded. "Martha, I've brought the wagon to take your trunk to the ranch if you're ready." "Of course." Martha gathered her shawl. "Mr. Jenkins, I'll return tomorrow to finish the typesetting." "No rush," Jenkins said, eyeing Caroline with obvious distaste. "Miss Watson, was there something you needed from the Gazette?" Left with no reason to linger, Caroline departed with a final poisonously sweet smile. Once she was gone, Vince turned to Martha. "Everything all right?" "Fine," Martha assured him. "Miss Watson was just expressing her good wishes." Vince's skeptical expression suggested he understood exactly what kind of good wishes Caroline had offered. "I've arranged for your trunk to be delivered to the ranch today so you'll have time to settle in before the wedding. If that's agreeable." "Yes, thank you." Martha hesitated. "Vince, you should know that people are saying. That is, they might think I'm marrying you because of the ranch, because of your prospects." He raised an eyebrow. "And are you?" "No, of course not." "Then what does it matter what people think?" The simple logic of this struck Martha forcefully. All her life she'd worried about others' perceptions, trying to be proper, respectable, acceptable. Yet here was Vince, unconcerned with anything but what he knew to be true. "You're right," she said. "It doesn't matter." Saturday dawned clear and crisp, the kind of early spring day that promised warmth by noon. Martha dressed carefully in her best blue dress, not a wedding gown by any stretch, but clean and well-made. Mrs. Sullivan had insisted on lending her a lace collar and a small pearl brooch for something borrowed. The ceremony itself was brief but meaningful. Pastor Evans conducted the service in the small white church, with Mrs. Sullivan, Mr. Rutherford, and several of the Triple R hands in attendance. Martha was surprised to see Jenkins there as well, his roomy eyes suspiciously bright as she and Vince exchanged simple vows. "I now pronounce you man and wife," Pastor Evans declared. "You may kiss your bride." Vince's kiss was gentle but firm, a promise rather than a passion. Yet Martha felt something stir within her at the touch of his lips on hers, a warmth that spread through her body and settled somewhere deep inside. The reception at the hotel was more well attended than Martha had expected. It seemed half the town had turned out, curious to witness the mail-order bride's sudden change in fortune. George Thornton was conspicuously absent, but Caroline Watson made an appearance, her smile fixed and brittle as she offered congratulations. As the afternoon progressed, Martha found herself separated from Vince, surrounded by townsfolk eager to introduce themselves to the new Mrs. Reed. She was speaking with the milliner when she overheard a conversation from nearby. "Can't believe Reed actually married her," a man's voice said. "Plain little thing like that, must be desperate for a housekeeper." "Or maybe just desperate," another voice chuckled. "Been alone at that ranch too long." Still, he could have done better. Thornton was right to send her packing. Not much to look at, is she? Martha froze, the words hitting her like physical blows. All her insecurities rushed back in a wave of humiliation. What if they were right? What if Vince had married her out of pity or convenience or simple desperation? Before she could compose herself, Vince appeared at her side, his expression thunderous. He'd clearly overheard the same conversation. "Gentlemen," he said, his voice carrying across the suddenly hushed room, "I'd appreciate if you'd refrain from insulting my wife." The men whom Martha recognized as the banker and the barber had the grace to look ashamed. "No offense meant, Reed," the banker muttered. "Just making conversation." "Then find something else to converse about." Vince's tone was dangerously quiet. "Come now, Reed." The barber attempted a jovial recovery. "You can't deny she's not exactly a beauty like Caroline Watson." "Nothing wrong with marrying for practical reasons, my wife," Vince interrupted, his voice ringing clear in the silent room, "is the most beautiful woman in this town. Not because of some superficial prettiness that fades, but because of what's in her mind and her heart. She's a treasure, my treasure, and anyone who can't see that is blind as well as stupid." Martha stared at him, breathless with surprise at his vehemence. Vince turned to her, his eyes softening as they met hers. "I didn't marry for practical reasons," he continued, speaking now to her rather than the chastened men. "I married because I found exactly what I've been looking for all my life, and I was smart enough to recognize it when I saw it." The room erupted in applause, led by Mrs. Sullivan and Mr. Rutherford. Martha felt tears spring to her eyes, overwhelmed by the public declaration. Vince took her hand and led her through the crowd to the door. "I think we've given them enough to talk about," he murmured. "Ready to go home." Home. Such a simple word, yet it held such power. Martha nodded, unable to speak past the emotion clogging her throat, Outside, Vince had prepared the wagon for their journey to the Triple R. He helped her up to the seat, then climbed up beside her and took the reins. As they pulled away from the hotel, Martha found her voice. "You didn't have to do that." "Yes, I did," he glanced at her. "Every word was true. You called me your treasure in front of everyone, because you are." His hands were steady on the reins. "I meant what I said, Martha. I didn't marry you for practical reasons, though I expect we'll be good partners in that sense too. I married you because something in me recognized something in you, something that feels like home." The simple declaration, spoken without artifice or exaggeration, moved Martha more than flowery poetry ever could have. She reached out hesitantly and laid her hand on his arm. "I feel it too," she admitted. "I never expected to, but I do." His smile was slow and sweet, warming his eyes to the color of a summer sky. "Good. That's a fine start to a marriage, I'd say." As the wagon rolled toward their new life together, Martha felt a sense of rightness settle over her. She'd come west seeking security and found something infinitely more precious, a man who saw her true worth, who valued her mind and heart above all else. A man who called her his treasure and meant it. The Triple R ranch house came into view. As they crested a hill, a sturdy two-story structure of logs and stone, with a broad porch and windows that caught the late afternoon sun. Smoke curled from the chimney, and a cluster of outbuildings spread out behind it, evidence of a prosperous, well-managed operation. "It's beautiful," Martha breathed. "It's home," Vince said simply. "Our home now." As he helped her down from the wagon, his hands lingering at her waist a moment longer than necessary, Martha knew with sudden certainty that she'd made the right choice. This wasn't the life she'd imagined when she'd boarded the eastbound train in Boston. But it was the life she wanted now, with this man in this place, building something meaningful together. Vince Reed might not be the husband she'd expected, but he was the one she needed, a man who saw beyond surfaces to the person beneath, who recognized her value when others had dismissed it. A man who called her his treasure in front of the entire town, and looked at her now as if she truly was the most precious thing he'd ever found. Martha smiled up at him, taking his hand as they walked toward their future together. She might have come west as a mail-order bride, rejected for being too plain, but she'd found her place at last, not as an ornament or a convenience, but as a partner, a wife, a treasure. And that, she decided as Vince led her across the threshold of their home, was worth more than all the superficial beauty in the world. 5 years later, Martha stood on the porch of the Triple R ranch house, watching as Vince taught their 3-year-old son Thomas to ride his first pony. Her hand rested protectively on her swollen belly, where their second child grew steadily larger each day. "Not too fast now," she called as Thomas squealed with delight, his father's strong hands keeping him secure in the tiny saddle. "He's fine," Vince assured her with the easy confidence of a man who'd been riding since before he could walk. "Got a natural seat, just like his mama." Martha laughed. When she'd first arrived at the Triple R, she'd barely been able to stay on a horse. Now she rode almost as well as Vince, though her current condition had temporarily grounded her. The ranch had prospered under their joint management. 2 years ago, they'd completed the purchase from Randall Rutherford, who'd retired to Denver but visited often enough that Thomas called him Grandpa Rand. The herd had doubled in size, and Vince's horse breeding program had gained a reputation throughout the territory for producing superior stock. Martha had made her own contributions to their success. Her meticulous bookkeeping had revealed opportunities for greater efficiency, and her correspondence with Eastern buyers had expanded their market. She'd also established a small school on the ranch for the children of their hands, teaching reading and arithmetic 3 mornings a week. The library she'd dreamed of now occupied an entire wall of their expanded living room, filled with volumes ordered from Denver and St. Louis. In winter evenings, Vince would read aloud while she sewed, their voices blending in discussion of ideas and stories that transported them far beyond the Colorado frontier. And in the privacy of their bedroom, they discovered a passion neither had expected, a deep physical connection that had grown from tentative beginnings to a joyful, mutual pleasure that still left Martha breathless with wonder. "Mama, look," Thomas called as Vince led the pony in a circle. "I'm riding." "I see you, darling." "You're doing wonderfully," Martha waved, her heart full to bursting with love for this small, perfect being they'd created together. The sound of an approaching wagon drew her attention. Shading her eyes against the afternoon sun, she recognized Mrs. Sullivan's rig coming up the road. "We have company," she called to Vince, who lifted Thomas from the pony and set him on his shoulders. "Just in time for supper," he observed as they walked toward the house. "Did you invite her?" "No, but you know Mrs. Sullivan, she likes to surprise us." Martha smiled. "And she always brings pie." Mrs. Sullivan wasn't alone. As the wagon drew closer, Martha recognized Edwin Porter, the town clerk, beside her. The two had been keeping company for the past year, much to the delight of Willow Creek's gossips. "Martha Reed, look at you blooming like a rose in June," Mrs. Sullivan called as Vince helped her down from the wagon. "That baby's going to be here any day now, I'd wager." "Not for another month, according to Dr. Wilson," Martha corrected, embracing her friend, "but I feel enormous already. Healthy babies need room to grow." Mrs. Sullivan patted her cheek. "And you've never looked more beautiful." It was true, though Martha still sometimes marveled at the change in herself. 5 years of ranch life had given her a healthy glow, and pregnancy had softened her features in a way that even Vince, who'd always found her beautiful, commented on regularly. Thomas squirmed to be put down, running to Mrs. Sullivan with demands to see what treats she'd brought. While she distracted him with promises of pie after supper, Edwin Porter approached Martha with a newspaper in hand. "Thought you might want to see this," he said, offering her the latest edition of the Willow Creek Gazette. "Just came in on yesterday's stage." Martha took it, curious. The headline caught her eye immediately. "Thornton Mercantile closes doors. George Thornton's business failed." She asked, scanning the article. "Ran it into the ground," Porter confirmed with evident satisfaction. Between his poor management and his wife's extravagant spending, they couldn't keep up with their debts. "They're moving to Denver, where her uncle has found him a position as a clerk in a dry goods store." Martha absorbed this news with mixed feelings. She harbored no ill will toward George Thornton, despite his treatment of her 5 years ago. In fact, she occasionally reflected that his rejection had been the greatest stroke of fortune in her life. "That's unfortunate for them," she said diplomatically. "Unfortunate," Mrs. Sullivan snorted. "It's justice is what it is." Man had the chance to marry a woman with sense and capability, and he chose a pretty face instead. He's reaped exactly what he sowed. Vince, who'd been listening quietly, put his arm around Martha's shoulders. "His loss was my gain," he said simply, "and I thank God for it every day." Martha leaned into his embrace, warmed by the sincerity in his voice. 5 years of marriage had only deepened their connection, transforming what had begun as a practical arrangement into a love story neither could have imagined. "Come inside," she invited their guests. "Supper's almost ready, and we want to hear all the news from town." As they gathered around the table in the comfortable ranch house, Martha and Vince at either end, Thomas between them, their friends across, Martha felt a profound contentment. This was the life she was meant to live, with the man she was meant to love. Later that night, with Thomas asleep and their guests departed, Martha stood by the bedroom window, gazing out at the moonlit landscape of the Triple R. Vince came up behind her, his arms encircling her, hands resting gently on her rounded belly. "Happy," he murmured against her hair, "completely." She turned in his embrace to face him. "Are you? More than I ever thought possible." His blue eyes, still as striking as the day they'd met, held hers with unwavering devotion. "You know, I meant what I said that day at our wedding. You are my treasure, Martha Reed, the most valuable thing in my life. Even now," she teased, gesturing to her expanded form. "When I'm as big as one of your prize cows," Vince laughed, the sound rich with affection. "Especially now. You're carrying our child. There's nothing more beautiful than that." He kissed her then, with the tender passion that still made her heart race after 5 years of marriage. Martha melted against him, marveling at how a journey that had begun in disappointment and uncertainty had led her to such profound joy. She had come west as a mail-order bride, rejected for being too plain. But in Vince Reed's eyes, the only eyes that mattered, she had always been, and would always be, a treasure beyond price. And that, Martha knew as she drifted to sleep in her husband's arms, was the greatest fortune any woman could ask for.